I just fell to the bed and I cried my eyes out for what could have been hours. I just remember thinking, what was the point of me being there? It was so painful, yet so futile, and but then the strangest thing happened. I saw this flicker of light coming from the fireplace in the room, which was just odd because this is an old discarded fireplace, no life in that room at all. I got up and I took a closer look and realized the light was shining to a small gap between the panels at the back of it. I felt around for a while and then nothing gave. It seemed sturdy, just like the back of any fireplace, I suppose. But for this little light coming from beyond it, and there I am feeling around in the dark, and suddenly I'm pressing a tiny lever that separates the boards, and they come apart. I remove one of them and see this dark, vast room open up beyond it, and which I see steps leading down and some steps leading up it. You'd never have known this area existed in the house. It was completely hidden behind this fireplace. It was then I should have just got out of there and called the police, I suppose, but I didn't. The light was coming from down the steps, so I just followed it, not really thinking of my own safety, just desperately following my curiosity and wanting to find an answer. I carried on walking down these steps, my torch offering was the only serious light, and suddenly I come to this underground tunnel that's been carved out of the ground. I mean, it was, if I wasn't so scared, I would have probably marveled at how marvelously crude and creepy it was, I suppose. There is candlelight there along the sides and all waxed into the stone ledge. But then I see this bright light at the end of the tunnel. And so I just follow it blindly. I walk down with no idea of what I'm going to find. But then I hear it. It's a baby, crying. I follow the noise to this room. And in this room, there is nothing in it but a candle flickering. And this cruelly made wooden box with a newborn baby in it, wrapped in a filthy bedsheet. I'm just in utter shock by this point. I don't know what's going on. I just don't know what to do. And then I hear this woman's voice crying out weakly, my baby, over and over. It's like this haunting cry for her baby. And it's coming from the room next door to where I was. And I eventually built up the courage to enter. But in this room, it's pitch black in there. There's no candlelight. So I shine my torch. And in one corner, I see this heavily decomposed body chained to the wall. And as I panned my torch across the room, I see another body, and then another, which is just a pile of bones and a chain. And I mean, how I'm not screaming by this point, heaven knows. But in the opposite corner of this room, my torchlight reveals what looks like a body. It's this heavily emancipated woman, skeletal, but for a small, feeble a bump in her tummy, almost dead, but not quite. She was alive, and it's her who's calling out for her baby. But she's out of it. I mean, she's delirious, completely delirious. Her eyes not even reacting to my torchlight. I'm shining in them. I'm in complete shock by this point. But one thing I do know is that girl who's barely clinging onto a life is Jess Palmer. It's Jessica. After 18 months of going over and over in my head, my son's case, I knew that this was her, the supposed victim of my hands. My son. I instinctively ran right over there to free her, but I just couldn't. There was this thick chain that had her pinned. I'm thinking what to do next. I mean, this is before mobiles, cell phones, so I couldn't just cause the police from down there. But then I hear these loud footsteps and the gruff sounds of a man shuffling down the tunnel towards this room I'm in. I run to one of the decomposed bodies. Yes, it's true. And to the semi-darkness, I just bury myself into it, trying not to vomit from the awful smell and the thought of what I am hiding under. As this man enters, he unlocks Jess from her chains and then drags her violently next door into where the baby is crying, so as to feed her. I don't know by this point. I assume I lay there for a few seconds and I composed myself, and then I just ran out of that room, back through that tunnel, looking behind me to see if some man was following me. But I just ran and I sprinted and I ran I ran back through the bedroom and out of that awful house.
Hilda knocked on a neighbour's house and called the police from there. They arrived, entered the property, and discovered to their own horror the awful things Hilda had witnessed. They freed Jess and her baby and rushed them to hospital. They also found the kidnapper hiding in a secret compartment on the top floor of the house and arrested him. He never spoke during his interview, nor his trial, remaining silent throughout. He had no identity, no proof of existence, and his lawyer went on record to say he was the most bizarre client he's ever worked for. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was in this old English, not much of it making sense. It was as if it had been plucked from the 18th century and dumped in late 90s Yorkshire. During the subsequent investigation, 5 decomposed bodies were found in total, all women and all whose disappearances Hilda had read about in her own investigating. They dated back several decades. The body who Hilda buried herself under was actually Melissa Holder, who police believe disappeared from the town 4 years previous. So who was this deranged man who spoke in this old English tongue? This is perhaps the most chilling part of the whole news story. He was the great-great-grandson of Jacob, the chef's son. Back in 1883, when Jacob killed Mr. Braithwaite and was alleged to have kidnapped and ran off with his daughter, Jacob had in fact taken Rose and hid her only feet away from where Mrs. Braithwaite mourned her, in the bowels of the house. He discovered the hidden tunnels and rooms, the innards of the mansion some years before, using it to hide from his parents, as well as using it to sneak up to the forbidden areas of the house, including Rose's quarters, where he'd watch her. Rather than face punishment for his crimes, Jacob chained Rose up in one of those hidden rooms, living in the secret innards of the house, forcing himself onto her and forcing her to bear his child, a son. They lived there in secret for years. It is believed that when Jacob's son was of age, around 1910, He himself, just like his father, snuck out and kidnapped a woman, keeping her locked away in this sordid inner house and continued the evil cycle. In fact, this evil act of depravity repeated itself over several decades. The male offspring of these forced relationships going on to do it themselves. The decomposed bodies and piles of bones that Hilda had seen on that night down in the tunnels were the poor female victims, the bearers of these children, chained and left to rot. Nearly all a couple of decades apart from each other than a couple, including Melissa's, who had been kidnapped only a few years before Jess Palmer. And the reason for this is, tragically, she may not have been able to bear children, and so she was simply left to rot. And this great-great-grandson of Jacob slipped out from beyond the fireplace in room number 5, Millfield House, on that wintry night in 1996, and snatched Jess as she slept next to Hans, dragging her down into the tunnels to bear the child Melissa couldn't. Thanks to the belief and tenacity of Hans's mother, Jess and her child survived, and her son was released from prison, an innocent man.
My mom was the real hero in all of this. She saved me, and thankfully she saved Jess. He's my rock.
The only way I can describe it is I was running on instinct, motherly instinct. There were so many red flags about going into the house, but I followed my gut. And I saw it all for myself. And I'm so pleased I did. For Hans and for Jess, who gets to live the life that she deserves.
Jess's kidnapper was jailed for life in 1999 without the chance of parole. And although the evil cycle has now been broken, it doesn't stop the hurt and fear of those affected. Jess moved abroad with her child and now lives a quiet life away from any media attention, and Hans moved back to Dusseldorf, where he practices as a therapist. But he is still haunted by his time inside prison. It has also left a lasting imprint on the housemates, some of whom will never get over what happened, only feet from where they went about their lives.
I feel just awful for poor Jess, taken the way she was, and I really struggle so much with the idea that this sick, evil thing was living just feet away from us all. And then I think that figure that appeared in my room that night, it wasn't an apparition, it wasn't a ghost, it was him. Just watching me, thinking whether to have me as his next victim. But then he just took poor Jess instead.